All right, praising God. This time for the fact that he is larger than our doubts. And I think this chapter reminded me of that because of the quote that I want to use to entitle the chapter, that being their gain. And the connection between the two hopefully will be clear by the time we get to the end of the chapter, chapter 4. It starts off with a relatively famous description of the mountain of the Lord, even if it is more famous from Isaiah's description early on in the book of Isaiah, I think around chapter 2. Either way, even if Micah's description isn't as famous, it's almost identical. Understanding that the chapter breaks down into two sections. One, the first 5 or so verses talking about the mountain of the Lord. The second set talking about another familiar theme, that being the redeemed or the remnant. But taking it step by step, it's a chapter that seems to, within those two sections, have a relatively rapid, what I'll call cadence, meaning there are not a lot of verse groups that block together well, as much as he moves from thought to thought rather quickly. But all that aside, let's just go ahead and describe the chapter. In verse 1, it says, "In the latter days, the mountain of the Lord, or the mountain of the house of the Lord, shall be established as the highest of the mountains." Once again, the mountains often being symbolic in the word for the kingdoms of the world. And that seems to be exactly what he is talking about here, as he will go on and talk about the way in which the peoples shall flow to it. Many nations, in verse 2, shall come, and not just come to sightsee, they shall come to look for the Lord, to teach them his ways, so that they can do more than just learn his ways. They can walk in them, or walk in his paths. Why? Because out of Zion shall come the law and the word of the Lord, and beyond him simply laying the law down, he is going to be the source of judgment, presumably the righteous judgments that you do not have to explain or have explained to you if you know what it's like to be interrupted. One, because I had an alarm go off in the middle of that thought. But if you know what it is like not only to be denied justice, but to be denied justice for a prolonged period of time, this verse does not have to be explained to you to understand what it is. What a relief it would be and will be in the day that God is establishing righteous judgments on the earth. As he will go on to say that there is a result for those people who have devoted themselves to being taught the ways of the Lord and walking in those ways. One, the result will be in the second half of verse 3. They shall turn their instruments of war into instruments of peace, and not just peace, but prosperity. In the famous passage that says, "They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore." But beyond that, it seems like they will be able to appreciate a time when they no longer have to divide their attention between making gains and defending those gains. As it's going to say in verse 4, "No one shall make them afraid," presumably of anything, but among other things, losing the things that they have worked for whatever reason. As he's going to draw a contrast in verse 5, saying that for all the peoples walk each in the name of its own God, some of those gods allowing them in their own morality to take whatever someone else has earned. But one of the reasons, or the advantages of the period of peace that God is providing for his people, is his ways are going to provide them a level of peace in which God is defending them from the nations that live according to whatever laws they can cook up or create and basically enforce by their own power. He's saying they'll be safe from all that because, once again, the mountain of the Lord will be the highest of the mountains, and he will be the one protecting their gains. As chapter is going to take a shift in verse 6 through the end of the chapter to talk about, once again, the remnant, literally in verse 7. But before that, he's going to describe them in verse 6, saying, "In that day, declares the Lord, I will assemble the lame and gather those who have been driven away and those whom I have afflicted." Understanding that God is not calling perfect people. He is calling people who are willing to overcome the days of discipline, even the days of discipline that he has imposed on them. He's not looking to condemn or judge us or make us feel shame forever. He is trying to simply get us into the kind of character that makes us a fit in a place of perfect peace, as we say from time to time. This chapter reminding us of that by saying his lame are actually going to form his remnant in verse 7. And the lame I will make the remnant, and those who were cast off a strong nation. As he is going to say not only that, in verse 8, he is going to restore the former dominion, or it's going to say the former dominion shall come. As verse 9 is going to talk about the way in which we are viewed in a specific period of time can be difficult to get out of the minds of those around us, especially when we fall into either hard times or into a period of shame. But God is going to remind them that their now is not there forever. And in verses 9 through 11, he is going to talk about the way in which the nations around them view them for now, in contrast to the forever that God has prepared for his people, beginning in verse 12, where it says, "But they do not know the thoughts of the Lord. They do not understand his plan, that he has gathered them as sheaves to the threshing floor. Arise and thresh, O daughter of Zion," as the chapter will close out with our title verse going on to say, "You shall beat in pieces many peoples and shall devote their gain to the Lord, their wealth to the Lord of the whole earth." Reminding me that periodically through the Psalms, it is not uncommon to hear David and others among God's people make a simple plea. How long, Lord? Understanding this discussion of the remnant, it reminded me that there are times when genuine service to God, not the pretentious service that we can be tempted to offer him, but genuinely sacrificing to serve God can bring us into hard times that sometimes are prolonged to the point where it makes us feel, as we say from time to time, that we were born to lose. However, God is reminding his people here in Micah chapter, 4, of a lesson that I think we could all benefit from to the degree that we are genuinely sacrificing. And as some of the New Testament writers will say, suffering as a Christian. It is important for us to sometimes pray for God to help us see beyond our struggles, to remember that we were not born to lose. So that beyond waiting for the day when God rights every wrong, we do not become conditioned to miss out on opportunities that God has for us to righteously win right now. Not so much winning in the pattern of the nations whose wealth is coming to an end, winning for personal gain, but winning in a way that promotes the peace that God is trying to give us.